Hello, C2HR community. I am Victoria Alvarez with Warner Brothers Discovery, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's HR Learning Series webinar, Navigating Work, Wellness, and the Gray Area in Between. C2HR is able to offer free quality educational programs to our 4,800 members thanks to the generous support of sponsoring companies. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Lawrence Advisory, a full-service leadership consulting firm. This session will be recorded and available for on-demand viewing. And this is an interactive program, so we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat box. You may have the option for Q&A, but we just ask that you put everything in the chat so we don't miss anyone's comments or questions. So to kick it off today, joining me is Erayna Sargent, aka the Burnout Whisperer. Erayna is a speaker, a mental wellness champion, and a burnout relief strategist. She is founder and chief anti-burnout champion at Hooky Wellness, where she merges employee-centric design and mental wellness for their signature burnout relief experience, Navigating Burnout. Erayna also hosted a session on debunking burnout with C2HR just a few months ago, which is a great foundation for this conversation as well. I will hand it over to Erayna to give us a quick overview on burnout for those who may not have had the chance to catch the debunking burnout session. I do think it'll help set the stage for today's conversation. Erayna.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me, and lovely to see and talk to you, Victoria. Really excited for today's session. It's a great way to start off the year with just making sure that we are grounded and have some understanding, as I'm going to guess stress is not going to go away anytime soon. And stress is a precursor to burnout. So just a little bit more about my background and about that session. So I'm a classically trained brand marketer and innovator. I spent close to 2 decades working across industries, including workspace design, consumer goods, and tech. I can tell you that burnout was not my expected path after that, but about 5 years ago, I hit a point where working harder was no longer working. Then that was followed by my therapist putting me on timeout as I didn't know how to change my pace, and thus ensued this new journey. So it started with my own journey for relief, and that's when I learned I was far from alone. So a Deloitte study from 2018 already reported that 77% of professionals were dealing with burnout. And when you cut those numbers or segment it by millennials, women, or Black professionals and professionals of color, those numbers just skyrocketed. And once again, that was before the pandemic and everything that ensued poured gasoline on these embers. And so I learned in this journey that how many of my friends, peers, and even leaders were dealing with burnout, but had no idea what it was, the language, and let alone what to do about it. So that's why I founded Hooky Wellness, really as a personalized burnout relief program and resource for high performance professionals. And so through a suite of workshops, training, specialized support for mid-level leaders, I fundamentally help people understand what it is, isn't, and what you can start doing about it. So these conversations like this are really a good stepping stone into creating that baseline knowledge, creating a collective understanding and accountability. So going back into the session, and just some quick notes on burnout, because we hear the word now, but often we miss what it truly is. And there's a lot of interchanging it with stress, which I will tell you it is not the same. Stress is short-term. It's a short-term experience that can be brought on by overwhelm, a little bit of too much. So that can be too much work, too many responsibilities, too much physical strain. Stress can also be good. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the stress curve, but that's a really, it's a good thing to Google, because there's truly a point of stress that is positive. It helps with development, learning, growth. It is what you, as well as your employees and teams, have used to reach the points that you have reached in your career. Then there is a point where stress becomes too much, and it can quickly accelerate into what is the burnout cycle in its own. So burnout, by definition, is a combination of mental, physical, and emotional overwhelm that is brought on by prolonged chronic stress. It is the result of stress, of unmanaged chronic stress. It is not the same thing as it. And so with it, burnout can bring a sense of emptiness. It is progressive. It is all encompassing. It is the thing that is driving employees away from workplaces in droves, and often in entrepreneurship or in different industries. It creates this sense of needing to run away. Both stress and burnout are costly. So they're too costly to ignore or continue to manage them in the ways that we have in the past. When you look at cause, job-related stress is contributing over 500 million workday lost. The WHO is talking about how it can drive $1 trillion in productivity loss in a year. But then you look at burnout, burnout has created up to 125 billion to 190 billion in healthcare costs alone. If you step away from the healthcare costs on an everyday, burnout is impacting your employees' engagement levels. One of the biggest stats you'll see in here is that burnout can cost 34% of someone's salary just for the disengagement. So for every employee you have making 75K that is dealing with burnout, that's a $25,000 cost of disengagement, where they're not connecting with the team. There's changes in their communication, lack of clarity, and lack of understanding so that they can perform. And the thing about burnout, and especially when it comes to high achievers, one is that they're most susceptible to burnout. It is not something that happens to slackers. It is a condition that happens to those who are your high value talent and those who want to achieve and want to do their best. And so it's discombobulating, honestly. There is also a soft cost of burnout that is often overlooked. It's really in this space of complete loss of confidence and competence. I got that phrase from one of my advisors. We were talking about something else, and that's the perfect way to phrase it. Burnout impacts the confidence of competence. And this is especially important and hard-hitting for your employees of color and women that are already climbing up an uphill battle in the workplace. So those are just some precursors. We're going to get into more of it, but definition of burnout stress is not the same. And it is costly, and it is very, very important. It is that silent killer. It is the leaky bucket in your costs as you look at everything going on in your org. Why can't my team communicate? What's going on with my productivity? What's going on with disengagement? Burnout was a challenge in our existing conditions. Then we moved how we work. We moved where we work. We changed expectations, and we changed all of the external drivers and points of stress in the rest of the world. And yet we often expected to deliver the same in these changing conditions. And so burnout is one of the biggest hot topics and one of the most important and biggest things you can do to support your employees in the workforce.
Thanks, Erayna. And I think that's super topical. I'm sure this is why everybody's here. And, how do we break this down a little bit in the context of what the subject of this session is, right? Navigating work, wellness, and I'll add a very gray area in between, because as you said, the pandemic, everything that's happened since 2020, it's totally changed the way we work. It's changed the way we live. Like you just said, we're working across time zones. So a lot of us are working hybrid, remote, in the office. Like there's just a huge spectrum of how we work, where we work. We all have our phones attached to us, right? You're pretty much accessible 24/7. And so I did want to bring up too something. There was an interview that you were participated in and you talk about know better, do better. So we got the background on burnout, what it is, what it isn't. The statistics I think are phenomenal. We'll drop the link to that session for anyone who didn't catch it in the chat as well. But can we talk about know better, do better? And before, I know you mentioned some of the symptoms and kind of presenting feelings of burnout. How do we differentiate stress and burnout in ourselves, right? We talk about how stressed we are all the time. It's almost like, oh, you're stressed, I'm stressed too, or I'm more stressed, or what's keeping you up at night? Oh, what isn't? So it's the hustle culture. I think that's everywhere. How do we actually know if we're nearing or experiencing burnout? And then how do we know better and do better?
Yes. And just a few questions. No, I love that was the interview that you heard. So the quote, know better, do better, is from the late Dr. Maya Angelou, is one of my favorite quotes. And I was just reflecting on it one day, and I was like, but it's so hard to go from one to the other. We're just like, know better, do better. Like it is just immediate, but there's truly a gap. So it's a know better, do better gap. And so when it comes to burnout, step one is know better, because there is a lack of general understanding on what it is and how it can manifest in individuals, and the fact that it can and will. I truly do believe burnout is something that can happen to anyone and will happen to everyone at some point. We're all somewhere in that cycle at all points in time, whether in the early stages where it's more of a preventative, proactive space, or you're in the later stages where it's like triage, no, some things have got to change. We're in that. It can happen multiple times in your life. Each episode can be different, but it is extremely hard to detect in high performance cultures and high achievers, because you're used to dealing with stress. You're used to doing the most in the craziest situations. Because things will always go awry when you're achieving and you're striving for more and you're taking on more and you're raising your hand, and your ability to navigate the unknown is just part of the game. So how do you recognize when there's a tipping point? So while burnout is personal and nuanced and it continues to bear shame, I love this space because it's one of the things I recognized was missing from the market. Like there's all this stuff about, oh, just do this. But half the time people are like, but am I dealing with it? So with it, as I said, it's various stages and cycles, but there's really 3 big warning flags that you can look at to determine if something's turning into the burnout cycle versus just your everyday stress. So chronic exhaustion is one of the first warning flags, and chronic exhaustion is huge. It is huge for burnout, as well as a number of other mental health, physical, and emotional conditions, like official mental health conditions. Chronic exhaustion or tiredness is a warning flag. Burnout is not a mental health or medical condition. Let's just take that out. It is not. So often we're the solution is, oh, just get mental health, just do therapy. But burnout isn't a medical condition. It isn't a mental health condition. It is a syndrome and a combination of a lot of situational factors. But chronic exhaustion is one of the first warning flags. That is the point where you're completely drained, emotionally, mentally, physically. No amount of sleep, no number of naps, as lovely as they are, is helping you or your employees feel replenished and back to their normal standard. So chronic exhaustion is one of the first warning flags. If you or those around you, or if you know people who are saying they're tired, they can't sleep, they should absolutely focus on that. That is a priority. Think of it as a house of cards, and sleep and exhaustion is the number 1 level and layer. You cannot build on more. You cannot take on more. You cannot refine or do things in a better way if you do not have that foundation of rest. So that is why rest is such a big conversation. So chronic exhaustion. The second one is working harder, but producing less. That's the slippery slope and the slyness of burnout. Burnout, especially in those early stages, people double down on work because there's always stuff to get done. And the idea of rest, taking breaks, it goes out the window because I have all this to do and it's just adding up rather than that list going down. That is exactly what happens at the beginning of burnout, because burnout impacts your professional efficacy and ability to produce. So if you find, or if you or your team members are talking about the increased number of hours, but their output is either going down, is diminishing, that's a flag. That's one of the big warning flags specifically for burnout. And then the last one I'd highlight is this increasing sense of feeling lost, or like one wants to escape. So this is really illustrative of how one of the most commonly perceived solutions to burnout is to leave a job. Most people think, oh, I'm just going to leave this job and my burnout's going to go away. And so that is why retention is harder, attrition is harder, because the burnout numbers are skyrocketing and people don't have real practical solutions to help them manage in place. And so if you or someone you see are feeling this sense of just running away, and as nice as Bali sounds, that's not a solution for true burnout. So those 3: chronic exhaustion, working harder, producing less, and then a sense of feeling lost and wanting to escape, are the big 3 when it comes to burnout.
And you said something, you just said about leaving a job. What happens, and this is something I went deep into your articles and all this, the awesome work that you were putting out there. What happens when you love your job, but you feel the only way out is to get a new job? And that's not always the solution, right? Because then you're going to go to another job. Maybe you don't like it as much, But how can we, and as an HR community, help employees either, and if it's setting boundaries or if it's, kind of navigate these barriers that are kind of the work needs to get done, right? There's endless amounts of work that always needs to get done. So that's not going to go away. But how can we better support our employees with to avoid burnout or to help mitigate it and help keep them in their jobs? You talked about retention and, it's like, I love my job, but I'm so burnt out. I just can't do it anymore. So how do we prevent that? What tips or solutions can you offer us in the time that we have together?
Absolutely. So there are some really important and straightforward things you can do, and then there's layers that are more complicated. So just these are simple, and these are the things that are the easy layer. But when it comes to it, it's always a matter of, it depends on the person, because it is a very personalized situation. And for those of you, especially that focus in career pathing and development, you probably understand those nuances better than anyone. Because there could be times where it's the matter of the kind of work someone is doing, or the position, or the manager themselves, versus, oh, they need a total career change or organizational change. It could be purely a career pathing. But at a universal level, when it comes to being a leader and supporting your team with burnout, whether it be preventing it or managing it, there are a couple things. One is clarifying expectations and priorities. Let's be real, there's a lot going on. I don't care how much we want to act like things are back to normal, and by going back to the office, everything will go back to how it was in 2019. It won't. The way that your employees think, the way that you think, our expectations from the workplace, expectations from employers, expectations from themselves, as well as what they're going to experience in life is different. Just let that say, it is different. No matter how much we try to push it and say, we're not going back to anywhere. Mindsets have shifted. And so within that, it is extremely important to clarify expectations and priorities, because as much as we would love for employees to only care about work in their lives, they have recognized there's other parts of their lives that is important. And for especially those who, as an organization, have talked so much about bringing your whole self to work, making sure you find your passions, making sure that you are doing those things that bring you joy. Your employees heard you, and they expect you to live by that. So by having clarity of expectations and priorities allows them to focus the time that they are dedicating to the work that they are doing for your organization on the right things. We all know busy work exists, but in this world where we are, bandwidth is at a limit right now. People are at their end. So for the time that they are dedicating, make sure they're putting it on the right things that will move the needle. It is extremely important. It was always important, but now more than ever. And the thing is, your employees aren't trying to slack. We've actually seen the number of hours increasing since employees are working from home. We're seeing works creeping into the weekend more than it even used to. And so by doing this clarity of expectations and priorities, you give them direction, and you can help them mitigate some of those behaviors that you may not intentionally be driving, but just are existing by nature of changing conditions. So clarity on expectations, empowering your managers and mid-level leaders. And it's different than pointing the finger or expecting them to solve everything. Empower them to try things, to create their subcultures within their organization. They are your feet on the ground. They are the ones that know what's going on. They understand the challenges, and they're taking on weight. Mid-level managers always had it hard, and it's even harder because they're trying to live up to the expectations and deliver on the objectives of the organization. They have their own internal shifts and are growing as leaders and as individuals, and they're managing the changing dynamics of teams and the way of working. So empower them to figure out what works and ensure that they are creating the space of psychological safety for their team, but also as leaders, how are you ensuring they feel psychologically safe within their organization? If your mid-level leaders fall, your organization will follow. I call them people pillars, and they are stressed and they have extra weight right now. So how can you empower them? It's as simple as allowing them to determine what's the best development for their team. How do they want their team to develop? Which resources that exist in your catalog are they empowered to employ to their team? Or are they able to introduce something different within the organization that they think would be a good test and learn? They can learn something about their leadership style, and the organization as a whole could learn something about what could be good for the collective in the org. Another big one is illustrating the behavior you want people to do. You've heard this before. I will tell it again. Take your time off and tell people about it. Respect your time off and theirs. That, I think I was sharing with you the other day. I had a peer that shared an out of office from their senior leadership that said out of office, but still working, in parentheses. That is the biggest red flag and no. Because if you're saying you're out of office, but you say you're working, what is the expectation your team is supposed to have? Can they actually be out of office? Yeah, you said that, but you don't even respect it. So are you judging them, which is what's going on in their head when they don't answer an email when they're sitting on the beach, as they should? And we know that vacations and time off is restorative. Data backs it up. That is how people restore and rejuvenate, and it helps with creativity. It helps with productivity. The list goes on. People need their time off. They need to take it. They need to feel empowered. And it's been exciting to see shifts in the workplace. Like in 2018, there were 768 million unused vacation days. I will always remember that number because it's insane, and that's just the US. And then in 2020, we still had a PTO bomb because people weren't taking their time. This continues to be a challenge because people don't believe it when organizations say it. The best way to have people believe it is to illustrate that action yourself and to adhere to it. So even if you're a leader and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I'm still working on my time off, that's fine. Just don't let them know. Don't send those emails while you're on your time off. Schedule them for when you come back. That there are ways to work within the system, even if you are not ready to make that huge jump. Don't pass your stress forward, is what I like to say. And then last but not least is listening to your employees and actually doing something about what they say. I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation about people in their exit interviews or during 360 feedback, and they give true, actionable, realistic feedback. And then those very leaders that have had universally negative feedback continue to get promoted. It's just like taking your time off. If you're not illustrating the said value or behavior you have said you wanted people to impart, they're not going to believe you, and your attrition will continue to be a challenge. So do not reward negative behavior or toxicity. They might be high value talent. Develop them and make sure people know you're developing them. Because if your employees, if you create a space and a place so that your employees can give you feedback, you don't listen or impart any of those changes, they will not believe you. And employee-employer distrust is at an all-time high. And so we have to take some of those very action-oriented, clear illustrations of listening and acting to show your employees that you mean business. And it is hard to turn a ship around. It's hard to change behavior. It's hard to build the future of work as we are working. Yes. So what are some of those smaller practical steps you can take as you're figuring out what are your policies? What are your structures? What are your beliefs? What is your employee values? As you're doing those big, hairy, audacious goals and tasks, what are some of those everyday things that you can start doing to add in what I call relief valves? Because we need those little bouts to help let off some stress and relief. Otherwise, we will end up in a combustible place. And I don't think any of us have the capacity to deal with that right now. I don't think you want to take on more right now.
No, definitely. And that's super, super helpful. Those are some really great takeaways. I want to ask you about, when we talk about giving you wrote another article on Well and Good that I thought was amazing in December called What Giving Yourself Grace at Work and in Life Really Means. And I think I think it's complementary to what you were just saying, and how we're managing our, as HR professionals. And then also oftentimes as HR professionals, we are always focusing on the client and the employees and not always looking at ourselves and what we can do for ourselves. So I think if you can just share a little bit about that and what grace, can look like at work and at home, because again, with our new ways of working, and that this very hybrid, very flexible, oftentimes, and not always, right? But we kind of have had to become flexible people as a result of everything that's transpired since 2020. So what can that look like for ourselves and for our employees? And then just a little side note as well to plug in, the topic of self-care has come up a lot. So if there's a way to kind of blend all of that together, and also what your thoughts are on self-care, because we have received some feedback, especially from working parents, that self-care is great if you can manage it, but as working parents and working caregivers, or if you even people who have pets and other responsibilities, there isn't always time for that, and so it sometimes gets a little frustrating when they hear those terms.
Yes.
Grace and self-care, work and life, and how it all kind of gets married together. And I know we do also have some questions from the group. So.
Yes, you're getting into the realness of it. And I appreciate your reading of my articles. For those out to you, what Victoria is referring to, I have a bi-monthly column on Well and Good where I talk about work and wellness. So I tackle some of the tough questions and often share either my personal experience or client experience to give perspective. So when it comes to giving yourself grace, it's funny because I wrote that because I wasn't giving myself grace anymore. Personally, I am a new mom. Victoria and I shared that. I have a 1-year-old. I'm an entrepreneur. We did a home renovation, lots going on, as you can imagine, as well as making sure I'm delivering for my clients. And so there was a matter of, there's always something to do. And this harkens back to the beginning of knowing better, doing better. It's a reoccurring cycle of recognizing when that gap is existing, because there is no one and done. It will pop up in life. And so here's a prompt for you. If you're ever like, am I in this? Answer the question, am I knowing better, and am I doing better? And then you can recognize where there might be opportunities to shift and to start taking some smaller actions. So when it comes to giving yourself grace, it is not a matter of just putting everything down and walking away from all your responsibilities. That's just not how a lot of us are built. I don't think anyone on this call is built that way. I don't think a lot of your employees are built that way. So the conversation of people slacking and not wanting to work that's something I don't agree with, because most people want to work and do a good job, as well as your hiring systems are great at vetting those people. But when it comes to giving yourself grace, it's a matter of, yes, there's always something to do, but how often are we forgetting to put ourselves on that list? And so often everything else has a due date and clear expectations, but you don't. And especially I find a lot of my clients that are like HR and those taking care of others, you're very bottom of the list because your job is to take care of everyone else. But who in the organization is empowered and support and expected to take care of you? And so I like to expand the perspective on productivity, as well as what doing your job means. Doing your job, part of doing your job is showing up as your best self so you can do your best work or the better work. And in order to do that, you have to practice self-care. You have to take care of yourself. You have to do that, or you will not have the energy to do what you have to do, or you'll get more frustrated about it. It's going to take you longer. And ultimately, it might start to take away the joy that you get out of the work, because it becomes more of a burden rather than something you're choosing to do. And so when it comes to self-care, there's all this conversation, self-care isn't selfish, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, it is. But I say everyone deserves to be a little bit selfish. We all deserve. Why is selfishness in the smallest amount a negative? Like, you should be taking care of yourself. But because as a part of taking care of yourself, if we're all taking care of ourselves in little ways, then we have collective care. That's the mix. Self-care by itself is nothing. Self-care that imparts collective care is the mix. And so as I talked about taking that time off for yourself, how are you encouraging your team to do it? How are you having a real conversation and celebrating it? Because going from, oh, I feel ashamed to talk about how much time, or that I took a day off, versus I took a day off, I'm going to tell my team, tell them how restorative it was and what I was able to do, and encourage them to take it. Now you have a whole team that's practicing collective care. I had an amazing client at the end of last year, and I recently found out that their VP, has now officially required, has now said, we're all taking individual quarterly hooky days. So they are using this accountability to practice self-care within their team. And this is a team of talent leads, talent in HR. So you know how stressed it is right now for the work that you do. So it's not a matter of slack and don't show up for work, but if you can coordinate, if you can make it part of the expectation of the workplace to take care of yourself, it's an expanded view of productivity and what it means. It's a different approach of self-care, and it moves it into collective care. You have to take care of yourself in order to do your job. And I would advise, if you're feeling okay right now, I'd advise you to do it now, because you get to the point where it's too late in the later stages of burnout, you have no choice. You've probably seen the quotes on Twitter where it'll be like, if you don't sit down, your body will do it for you. That is truly the case. And the later stages of burnout can open the door to mental health challenges that may have been latent or manageable. It could do physical ailments. It can do a slew of other things that you could have prevented, managed, or mitigated if you had taken that time before and practiced a little bit more self-care. And yes, there will always be stuff to do. There will always be things on the to-do list. There will always be people that need you. There will always. So if you view it that way, then you'll never have a break. What I like to advise for a lot of people who have a lot on their plate is to plan it in advance. Plan your break in advance. Put it on your calendar so that it's not something you can overlook. It's now a part of the plan, part of the schedule. So the quarterly hooky days, I'm huge on it. I actually have a tool on my site, 5-step checklist on how to get a day out of the office and actually be offline. What do you need to do to get out and make sure everyone knows and you're not feeling the stress of checking your email both during your break, nor are you feeling the stress the day you come back, because that's a real thing. So those are some very important things to just think about when it comes to self-care and becomes to productivity. And one last thing that comes to mind as a caregiver, one of the most transformational things for me has been having my son, because two things. One, it made me sit down. Definitely made me do it because I had other things that I needed to manage. But then also, I am now viewing things from the lens of, what do I want to impart to him? What do I want him to see illustrated? I come from a household, very blue collar, from Detroit. My parents worked, grind. Everybody was always working. When I could have a job, I had 3. So it is deeply in my DNA. Changing my pace is not something I learned, but it is a different thing that I want for my son. I do not want him to recognize and have to experience burnout multiple times, because he lacks the general awareness of how stress can create this in his life. I want him to understand that there are ways to prioritize self-care and to put it into a plan that still pays off an achievement. Like, it's not if the world is not as binary as we like to believe it is, nor is it as binary as what systems have set up for us. And so it can be overwhelming, but it is also exciting where we are today. Yeah. We're not going back as much as some of us want, but how are we going to move forward? We're at a point where we're creating something new. And I have found in recognizing we're creating something new gives us the space to do new things or do things in a different way. So once stepping back, clarify your priorities. You don't have to dictate how someone gets there. So that's where you're seeing a lot of organizations trying new things. So giving a whole week off, like LinkedIn or Bumble has done, that's huge. Highly recommended. Coordinated days off eliminate some stress, collective care. But also, how are you dealing with hybrid work environments? When are employees expected to do their work? If as an organization, you care on the output and the delivery of their needs, empower your mid-level leaders to work within the ways that work for their team. So maybe it isn't as much set work hours. Maybe it's a matter of, this is the due date and deliverable and the expectation of success, and they can figure out how to work within their work team to get there. Everything doesn't have to be solved at a 30,000 foot level, but you can empower your leaders and give them some parameters to work within. That can be a way we start to restructure and rescope and create this future of work. And I know it can be overwhelming. I'm very much a futuristic thinker. Half of my career was in innovation. And with the work that I do, I use design thinking in this space. So it is not something that you're just going to step to the whiteboard and figure it out in one day. It is a process, but it is something that is doable, and you can test and iterate to figure out what works for your org and for your individual teams. But hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, no, it did definitely. And I can attest, we, Warner Brothers Discovery also closed the last week of the year, and it was really, really restorative. It was really amazing and how many people came back and just felt a lot better. That everybody was off and there was no pressure. And if somebody for some reason had to do some work or close something up, it was on them. And it was definitely, and I haven't spoken to anybody who who shared that they did that, but definitely
Yes.
was really awesome. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat here that I'll just start at the top. So Carol Ann Bridgewater has asked, can you please explain know better, do better? It's my first time hearing the term, and I'm not 100% sure of exactly what it means. So I know we
Yes.
went into it a little bit, but if we can kind of reiterate that.
Yes, great question. So it means it in the most literal sense. So it's truly the act of understanding or being educated on something and then making different steps or taking different actions based on the education and the learning that you have. And so what is the experience in the workplace? So from a very workplace situation. So if your leader comes and they're like, I like to receive my emails in a particular way. I would like to have subject line very clear. I would like to have bullets, and I would like to have the due date and tell me what I need to do. They explicitly tell you this, so you know it. And then it's a matter of, oh, no wonder they didn't respond to my emails, because I kept giving them paragraphs of information. Now, if you continue that behavior of giving them paragraphs of information, you cannot be surprised when they don't respond. But if you now know better on how they like to receive information and communication, you take said action, and that is now how you deliver your future communication and correspondence, and you get a different output. So that is that's like a very workplace illustration of knowing better and doing better. But that is something that can happen anywhere in life. I think what I can harken to 2020, there was a lot of knowing better. And thankfully, there has been some doing better consistently. And so when you think about it, it applies to all things in life, but especially when it comes to self-care, collective care, and what we can do about burnout. People acted like burnout was a condition that only happened to individuals that were slackers, couldn't cut it. It was something, I call it hustle culture's dirty secret, used to sweep it under the rug. But as organizations, we know better now. We know it is a result of structures, systems, collective behaviors, norms, as well as individual behaviors. So what are we doing about it? i.e., giving a whole week off to your employees so they can actually prioritize the self-care. Illustrations of knowing better, do better. So yeah, thank you for that question, Carol.
All right, thank you. So we also have another question: how to invest in care that is actually restorative versus just scrolling social media to check out for a few minutes. I think we're probably all guilty of this to some extent. I know I get lost in TikTok, and before I know it, I'm like, oh, it's been 30 minutes and I've just been watching, people cook for a half hour, which was great for me. But I think this is a great question. What can I do that's actually restorative?
Yes, great question. So scrolling on social media can actually be restorative. Just know your tipping point of when you're like, no, this is mind numbing and isn't actually helping. But if you are scrolling from a matter of, I just need to see happiness and laugh at some cats and babies, that can actually be restorative, as well as binging television can actually sometimes be restorative. For me, it's how I decompress. I love everything all of you are doing. I am a heavy consumer of all of it. It is my happy place and how I decompress. But how do you know something that's restorative? So I do a lot of work with my work. I talk a lot about the 4 pillars of mental wellness. And just to give you a high level: growth, rest, play, and community. And so there are things within each of those pillars that can help you in different ways. And you can strategically use the different pathways of mental wellness based on the symptoms that you are experiencing. And so this just this is exactly the work that I do, is helping people understand what are their symptoms and what specifically you do about it. So for example, if you are looking for something that, if you are feeling overwhelmed and like your brain won't stop and you need to relax, which often is the space that is missing in the clients that I work with. Rest and relaxation, we just don't know how to do it. It's not, we're like, but I mean, I'm doing these tasks around the house. You'd be like, that's not relaxation. It can be, hobbies are great, tasks are great, creativity is great, but it's not necessarily that. So to rejuvenate, you could do things that so in the rest pillar, there is sensorial modalities is something. So if you've ever heard of sound baths, light therapy, aromatherapy, that's in the rest pillar, and that is actually restorative. Other things in rest, those are the things that help your mind and body breathe and relax. So yoga does fall in there, and meditation and mindfulness fall in there, but there's 101 ways of each of those. I jokingly always say, do not invite me to a yin yoga class. That is not my speed. It is not going to help my brain stop. It actually makes it speed up because I'm bored. But there's vinyasa, which is flow, which is you can only focus on your breathing. So you have to stop the rest of your mind from running. For me, my meditation was flying a kite. So what are those type of things, especially active meditation, which if you go to my site on the blog, I have a blog on the Hooky Wellness site that talks about different ways of active meditation. Those are things that cause you to hone in on the activity you're doing so that you have to turn off other things. So gardening, cooking sometimes, flying a kite. That's a reason why Zen gardens are something. So those are things that are restorative and actually are evidence-backed to help you rest and relax. So there's a little help there.
Thank you. Great. I think we have another question. So, and yes, Sonia, also just want to share, I know it's in the chat, but thank you for staying on. And I'm glad that this has been helpful to you to reprioritize. Okay, another question. What are your recommendations on navigating work and growth in your career if you're either working remotely or if you're hybrid or working from an office where your leaders are not based? So what can we do as HR professionals and or employees to avoid what some might call proximity bias?
Yes. So changing of the workplace environment is huge and can have a very big impact on employees. The thing about it is working remote isn't new. Like there were 30% of employees that were doing it before the pandemic. So there are ways to do it and to be successful. A couple things, both as an employee and as a leader, what you do is make sure those people aren't lost. They feel like they're a part of the workplace and a part of the team. How can you do that? Some of the successful things I've seen is if you're in especially 100% remote is to have some type of regular in-person meetups. I am a millennial. I am pro remote work. I am pro hybrid, but I also recognize the benefits of getting together. It could be my time in workspace design and office furniture, but there's truly value. So what kind of regular reoccurring meetups can you do? Because there's nothing like being in person, or just that connection. If you have certain individuals on your teams that are remote, but some teams are in office, having their regular meetups. When I worked remote for 2 years, I found it very helpful to go to the office every month just to check in and have those hallway conversations. So having some way for people to meet in person at the right time to do the right work is huge. Going back to the office just for the sake of going back to the office, that's actually just going to create more angst because a lot of people, for a number of reasons, are not trying to go back. Whether it be for your professionals of color who are really happy to not have to deal with microaggressions every day, from the parents on your teams that now have a different way of managing their family and their lifestyle, from those who just don't live in the same place and they want the freedom of being able to handle their physical well-being. There's a lot of different changing dynamics, but having a regular way for them to meet up is really, really important. Clarifying expectations is huge. So once again, there's a lot of scope creep of how long people are working, where they're working. So just be clear on what is expected of you and making sure that that clarity is continuous. It is not just tell them their goals in the quarter or the top of the year. but things change. You know how fast things change. Making sure if you're having some type of making sure career pathing is truly a part of the conversation and that your managers understand how it works within your organization. If you've changed some things within that, make sure they know, because they are the first point of reference and communication for your employees. So if you've changed how you do succession planning, if you've changed how employees are evaluated, making sure that that actually trickles down and is communicated is huge. Because if you will have employees that are working off of the old playbook, as well as, so you have to make sure that they know the new playbook is if it's shifted. And then being honest. So for some workplaces, working remote will impact their career. For some places. And if that is you, or if that is that function, be real about it. Honestly, just be real about it. Because if you are telling employees, oh, if you choose to work remote, if you opt into the remote, it will not have any impact on your career, but you know it's not the truth, then that opens a cesspool of challenges that will likely just result in attrition. So if that is the case, one is being real about it, and two, what you're being real about, recognize as HR, is that sustainable? Is that something you can continue to have as an expectation for your employees, or are there some system structures, expectations that need to change on the organizational end? So even if that is how it is right now, I would imagine I'm just making up something, for producers, they got to be there. Like, they have to be in a place to have that quick interaction, yada, yada. If there aren't systems, tools that allow them to work as efficiently remote, if the expectation is, nope, in order to move up the ladder, you need to be in office, or you need to do X, Y, and Z, making sure they have clarity on that expectation, and then thinking on, is there a workaround? So if someone just is like, nope, never, and you don't want to lose them, or you believe that hybrid or remote is a way of working that works in your org or needs to be in your org, what is the workaround for the known hurdles and issues that could come up with that type of dynamic? And I think so often we're just like, yeah, we just changed the way of work, but we changed where people work, but we didn't change the way of working. And that has created this angst and turmoil where we are now. You do not have to have all the answers immediately, but starting to recognize that some things have to change, some dynamics has to change, and also communicating that to your team so they know that you're aware and you're working on it, even if you don't have the answer. That is a best practice. Just tell the truth, even if the truth is we don't know yet, but we are working on it. Because if you don't say anything, your employees still will be aware, and they will make up whatever they want, and then it will go through the rumor mill. And I have a feeling none of you want that, and you've had that experience, and like, absolutely not. So where you can share and take them on the journey with you.
And I guess another question related to that. So if you don't have the ability to bring your teams together in person, and you have a leader or a manager working in a different office from their employee, how can we guide as HR professionals, right? Guide the leaders, but also the employees to kind of create connections and almost show up in a way that they can be visible and interact with their employees or with their managers or their leaders when they may not have the ability to do that on a day-to-day. So what can employees do to be more visible? What can leaders do and managers do to be more accessible to their teams if, remote working or hybrid working is just the way that it is, and you don't have an opportunity to meet in person?
Yeah, so that is a nuance, and it depends, but a couple things. One, you can get Hookie to come in and support. Would love to open that communication channel. But if in person isn't something, so what is the regular cadence of communication? For that being team meetings, so looking at it at a team level, team meetings. Okay, just because someone's on Zoom doesn't mean that they're engaged or they're really there. How is there a way to build that connection? We all care about team engagement, team bonding. I am not a proponent of force fun. I'm not a proponent of too much force fun. You need it every now and then, but They don't want to do that either. But within these work meetings, how are you able to bring more of that person into the meetings? So is it a matter of a rotating between around who talks about the projects that they're working on? So there's more visibility. So it takes the place of the hallway talk or the random talks in the office. People know what's going on the team. So a leader can have it change however their cadence of calls, but every other week, someone else talks about what they're doing. So they're talking about what they're doing at work as well as they're talking about what they're doing at home. So you're getting that personal connection. Same for divisions or functions, having those type of share out so that they are getting in front of the leaders. So that's something that would happen at both levels, whether it be a director or VP, to ensure that their managers are promoting that, as well as their managers to ensure that they're passing the mic. So often in these conversations, only the senior leaders are talking, they're doing the big report outs. But if you are empowering them to allow their other people, the people doing a lot of the heavy lift, to actually share out on their projects, that not only is helping with exposure, it is also giving them a chance to hear the questions that come up, to speak for the projects that they have. So that type of stuff that would happen in a everyday in-person environment, just making it a part of the system with remote employees. There are team building stuff does absolutely play a role. Just be careful you're not doing too much. Force fun, they know it. And employees don't love too much forced fun, but they recognize the value of it. So that was organizations heavied up a little too heavy right away. And so people were getting burned out on that. And so how do you make it something that people can actually look forward to? It is something they actually want to do. So thinking creatively on how you can build connection. And sometimes you can build asynchronous connection rather than everybody has to jump on the Zoom call at the same time. So looking at asynchronous connection as an option and how you can bring that in. And then somewhat asking them what they're interested in. Like, I know we do surveys all the time, but creating a space where they can think more creatively and to say what is either the emotion, the feeling that they want to impart, rather than necessarily the exact action or activity they want to do. So those are some thoughts. Hopefully that helps. I like this question, so I'll think even more on it. It might be a future topic for writing.
And I want to just do one more call out for questions. If anyone else has any questions, we have a couple of minutes left. So we'll see if anything else comes through. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask you one final question. If we can take one, this has been an amazing session, and thank you so much for spending the time with us. But if there's one thing you can leave us with, or a couple of things to kind of sum up the best way you would advise us to navigate work wellness and the gray area in between, what should we walk away from this absolutely kind of in our back pocket taking away?
That there's no one singular answer. I think that is really important to think about and to remember, because there can be so much pressure and stress to get it right the first time, but no one knows what they're doing right now. This is an interesting time where the academics are leading, but there is a gap between the academics and the actual practice. And what we all know is that workplaces are so nuanced. So it's a matter of testing and iterating to figure out what works for you and your organization and your team, and then being open to evolving it as it goes. I think one of the biggest lessons we learned is that the only thing constant is change, and change doesn't always change in the way we think it will. And so giving yourself that grace to recognize that this is just a version, the V1 or the V2 of support and solution, gives you that grace to recognize that you have another version you can do. And it's not that you always want to have this project on your plate, but you will always be learning, growing, and iterating. It's part of the process of life, as well as part of the process of the workplace and leading organizations and teams. And when it comes to burnout, one of the first steps is recognizing what's going on. We talked a lot about that in the gap. So I actually do have a quiz. I'll drop the link as well, and I'll share it with the team to share out later. But if you want to understand, even with you or your team, if burnout is something that's showing up in your life, and like some quick tips on what you can do about it, I just dropped a link in the chat. I'll be adding it to my site, but right now it's not there yet. V1. But it's a first step is to start understanding what's going on. Then you can start taking strategic steps, focus steps on practicing and trying new things to do something about it, and share what you learn. This is your community of people in it with you. You are not in a silo. And as much as organizations and industries like to act like everything's different over here, people are universally the same. The same challenges will likely exist. So if you're finding something that works for your team, share it. If you're like, my team has to do this type of work, they're in this type of working environment, and we are in a spirit of growth, and we figured out how to build connection with this, pass it along to someone else so that they can understand it, and maybe they might want to test it out themselves. So sharing is caring. So share that with the world, because you deserve to be applauded for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Pass along the learnings, not the stress.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much, Erayna. This has been amazing. Thank you to the Lawrence Advisory for sponsoring the session, and to everyone for joining in, tuning in. We have about 4 minutes to spare, and our goal was to end this with a little bit of time to give everyone 4 minutes back into your day. Take that for, I don't know, take a moment to breathe, do a little token of self-care if you can, or if you have to jump to the next meeting. Thank you.
No, don't jump. Don't jump. Use that headspace or calm that you give to your employees. Do one of those micro sessions and breathe. There's a practical thing we can do.
I'll take one deep breath before we sign out. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. Thank you.